The high school auditorium buzzed with murmurs and restless shifting as students filed into the rows of fold-out chairs. Banners reading Career Day 2025, Dream Big, drooped slightly from the walls, their bright lettering at odds with the dull overhead lights and the collective teenage skepticism in the room. Parents and teachers lined back, arms crossed or cradling lukewarm coffee, while the principal adjusted the mic for the next student. Jenna Coleman stood backstage, her palms slick with sweat, fingers curling tightly around a crumpled note card she'd long since memorized. At 17, she was quiet by nature, the type who blended in without much trouble, but today was different. Today, she was going to speak when her name was called. Jenna stepped into the glare of the stage lights, squinting briefly as the sea of faces blurred together. She smoothed the front of her thrifted blazer and approached the microphone. "Hi, I'm Jenna Coleman," she began, voice steady despite the thudding in her chest. "And I want to be a commercial airline pilot." The silence that followed was immediate and, then, like a wave crashing against fragile hope, the room burst into laughter. A boy in the back mimicked plain sounds, drawing more chuckles. But the loudest voice came from the third row, where Ashley Monroe, all glossy hair and smug confidence, leaned forward with a sneer. "Girl, you can't even afford lunch. You think Delta's gonna hire you?" A few more laughs erupted, crueler this time. Jenna's knuckles whitened at her sides, but she didn't move. Off to the side, a teacher exchanged a glance with Roy Coleman, Jenna's uncle and legal guardian since her mum's death. He didn't laugh, but his shake of the head said enough. "She can't even drive straight. Talk less of fly a plane," he muttered, not as quietly as he thought. Jenna heard him. The words didn't wound, they seared. Her gaze swept the room. Former friends, half-interested parents, distracted teachers. Not one face showed belief. The principal awkwardly cleared her throat, gesturing for Jenna to wrap it up. Without another word, she stepped back from the mic and walked off the stage. Outside the auditorium, the late morning sun cast sharp shadows on the concrete. Jenna's face was flushed, her shoulders stiff, but no tears came. Not anymore. Instead, she paused just outside the door, letting the laughter fade behind her. Her chest rose and fell with slow, deliberate breaths. She reached up to tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ears, then turned and walked away, each step fueled not by shame, but by a quiet, smouldering fire that no one in that room had seen. Before Jenna Coleman's world had been quiet, long before it became lonely. Her earliest memories were blurry snapshots, her mother's soft hands brushing her hair, the distant echo of her father's voice, and then nothing. He disappeared when Jenna was just 4 years old, leaving behind a void filled with unanswered questions and unopened birthday cards. Her mother, Elaine, tried to fill the silence with love and stories of resilience. As a nurse, Elaine worked long hours, always tired but never too tired to sing to Jenna at night. Then, when Jenna was 12, cancer came like a thief in the dark and took her mother to. After that, she was packed into a spare room at her Uncle Roy's house, and the world grew smaller. Roy Coleman was a mechanic with grease-stained hands and a mouth full of bitterness. He never struck her, but the words he used left bruises just as deep. "You're a burden," he said, often sometimes under his breath, sometimes loud enough for the whole house to hear. His wife Lisa tried to counter the cold with soft smiles and warm leftovers left on the stove, but her voice rarely rose above Roy's. Aunt Lisa meant well, but her kindness was quiet, shrinking behind Roy's booming presence. Jenna learned not to expect much. She kept her head down, her mouth shut, and her dreams to herself. After school, Jenna changed out of her worn-out jeans and apron-wrinkled shirt to clock in at the Rusty Spoon Diner, a greasy little place off the highway where truckers tipped better than locals. The work was hard, the pay minimal, but during her 15-minute breaks, she'd sit on a milk crate near the back exit and flipped through dog-eared aviation manuals she'd found at a used bookstore. She didn't fully understand all the technical terms yet, but she devoured every page like it was a map to another life. Her manager joked she was the quietest waitress he'd ever hired. Customers barely noticed her. At school, it wasn't much different. Jenna's grades were solid, never the best, but always above average. Her teachers rarely remembered her name, except for Ms. Graham, her elderly science teacher with wild white hair and a spine bent slightly by time. Ms. Graham had seen something in her early on. She pulled Jenna aside after class one day and said, "Flying is not just for rich kids, it's for brave ones. You've got the mind, Jenna. You've just got to hold on long enough for the world to catch up to you." That moment lived in Jenna's pocket like a talisman. Things were more complicated when it came to Ashley Monroe. Once upon a time, the two girls had been inseparable, braiding each other's hair, laughing until their sides hurt, sharing secrets like sacred treasure. But something shifted when Ashley's father got promoted to some big executive position and her house filled with new furniture and private tennis lessons. Suddenly, Jenna's hand-me-downs and free lunch status weren't just noticed, they were ammunition. Ashley climbed the social ladder by stepping over people like Jenna. Now, she led the popular crowd, trailing perfume and cruelty in equal measure. Their friendship was a ghost, haunting every hallway Jenna walked. At home, Jenna kept her dreams in a shoebox under the bed, literally. It was where she hid her printed application to Ridgeview Community College's aviation program. She'd filled it out late one night, after Roy had fallen asleep in front of the TV, his beer bottle clinking against the floor. It wasn't a 4-year university, but Ridgeview had a flight simulator and a partnership with a nearby airport. Getting in felt like reaching a peak, except she had no idea how she'd afford the climb. No one in her family would co-sign a loan. Scholarships felt like long shots, and her savings from the diner barely covered phone bills and school supplies. Still, Jenna clung to the idea of flight the way some people clung to religions, something higher, something that promised escape, freedom, a world where she wasn't just the girl in the background. She didn't need applause or Instagram likes. She just wanted a cockpit, a runway, and the chance to prove everyone wrong. But the clock was ticking. Graduation loomed. Her savings remained thin, and Roy's voice echoed in her head far too often. Still, each time she flipped through those aviation manuals or stared up at the sky through the diner's grease-smudged windows, the fire inside her flickered back to life. Even if the world never believed in her, Jenna had decided she would learn to fly, even if she had to build her own wings to get there. The envelope was thin, but Jenna knew the moment she saw the return address that her whole world could change. Ridgeview Community College. She'd checked the mailbox 3 times that day, pretending it was by accident. Standing on the porch with the afternoon sun on her back and grease-stained air drifting from the garage, she took a breath and tore it open. Her eyes scanned the words, "Congratulations, aviation pathway, accepted." For a second, the whole world went silent, her heart thudding in stunned rhythm. Her knees nearly buckled as joy bloomed across her face, pure, rare, radiant joy. She clutched the letter like a lifeline and ran inside, barely noticing the worn floorboards or the smell of last night's dinner lingering in the air. "Uncle." "Roy," she called, her voice lighter than it had been in years. I got into Ridgeview's aviation program." He was in the kitchen, hunched over a mug of black coffee, flipping through the local paper. Jenna held the letter out like a trophy, her hands trembling, eyes wide with hope. Roy looked up slowly, his eyes dull and already sour with disapproval. "Aviation," he repeated, snorting. "Is that a joke?" "No, it's real," she said quickly, unfolding the paper and pointing at the official stamp. "They accepted me. It's not a big school, but they have simulators and a program." I could actually start training before she could finish. He stood and snatched the letter from her hands. Without reading a word, he tore it straight down the middle, then again into pieces no bigger than a playing card. Jenna stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat as the paper fluttered to the floor like ashes. "You're not going anywhere," Roy growled. "You're staying here. You'll work the shop or the diner like everybody else. That's life. You don't get to skip out just because you've got some dumb dream." Aunt Lisa had come to the doorway, her face pale, hand clutching the side of the wall. "Roy, for God's sake, don't start with me, Lisa," he snapped, pointing a finger at her. "I put a roof over her head. She doesn't get to run off and leave us to cover her mess." Lisa opened her mouth again, but whatever courage she had flickered and died under Roy's glare. Jenna looked between them, her aunt's quiet heartbreak, her uncle's stony scowl, and then down at the shredded remains of her dream lying on the floor. Without a word, she dropped to her knees and began gathering the torn pieces, fingers moving carefully, reverently, like she was handling something sacred. Roy left the room without another glance, and Lisa stood frozen, useless, near tears. Jenna didn't speak. She carried the pieces to her room and closed the door softly behind her. That night, she tucked the fragments of the letter beneath her pillow, each one an echo of a future she refused to surrender. Her eyes stayed open long after the house had gone quiet, staring at the cracked ceiling, jaw clenched to hold back the sobs. But in the small hours, when the weight of the day finally broke her, she reached for her phone and called the only person who had ever truly seen her, Ms. Graham. The line rang twice before the familiar, raspy voice answered. "Jenna," the teacher said, her tone instantly alert. "I'm sorry it's late," Jenna whispered, her voice shaking. I don't know what to do. I got in, but he ripped it up. He said, I can't go. He said I have to stay here, like I owe him." There was a pause on the other end. Then Ms. Graham said gently, "Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. I want this more than anything," Jenna whispered, tears finally sliding down her cheeks. "But what if wanting isn't enough? What if I can't do it alone?" "You're not alone," Ms. Graham said softly. "You've got me, for one. But listen to me, Jenny, you don't need permission to chase the sky. You need grit and time. That's it. No one can keep you grounded if you don't let them." Jenna held the phone to her chest for a long time after they hung up, listening to the quiet hum of the world outside her window. The sky was still there, even if no one else believed she belonged in it. And maybe that was enough for now. The house changed after the letter. If it had once felt stifling, now it was suffocating. Roy, never a gentle man to begin with, turned cruel in quiet, calculated ways. He doubled Jenna's chores, had scrubbing grease off garage floors well past midnight, waking her at dawn to mow lawns and sort rusted bolts by hand. He cut off the internet, claiming it was too expensive, though she knew better. Then came the day she came home to find her aviation manuals, the ones she'd spent months collecting, page by page, from thrift stores and online forums, across the backyard, soaked and torn, reeking of gasoline. "Books won't teach you how to survive," he said from the porch, beer in hand, smirking as she fell to her knees trying to salvage what she could. Jenna didn't cry. She hadn't cried in front of him since she was 12. With nowhere left to study, she started sleeping at the diner. It was just a few hours each night, tucked into the storage room behind the dry goods shelf, wrapped in her spare hoodie with her notes hidden beneath her backpack. The manager, a gruff but kind-eyed man named Carl, noticed but said nothing. He just started leaving out extra food at the end of the night shift. She'd sneak glances at the flight simulator app Ms. Graham had helped her download before the internet was cut, her fingers tracing invisible yokes and instruments in the dark. But the world outside didn't stay quiet. Ashley Monroe, still the Queen of Petty, somehow got hold of the career day footage. Jenna didn't know who filmed it, someone in the crowd. Maybe, but Ashley took it, spliced in clips of cartoon planes crashing, and set it to a mocking pop song before posting it on TikTok with the caption, "Future Pilot, more like future waitress of the skies." It went viral. Thousands of views overnight. Comments laughed at her clothes, her voice, her ambition. Students at school whispered behind cupped hands, and teachers looked the other way. Humiliation cloaked her like a second skin. Jenna stopped showing up to school altogether. The building didn't feel like it had space for someone like her anymore. But Ms. Graham noticed. One Thursday afternoon, she came to the diner, standing at the counter until Jenna reluctantly emerged from the kitchen. She didn't lecture or scold. Instead, she slid a worn, padded case across the table and unzipped it. Inside was an old tablet, scratched, outdated, but functional. "It's got a working flight sim app," she said quietly. "It's not perfect, but it's close. I figured you might still want to fly." No one believed in the Wright brothers. Either, you know. That night, Jenna sat alone in the storage room, hands trembling as the simulator booted up. For a moment, she was weightless, hearing only the hum of the virtual engine and her own heartbeat. She was still in the air, no matter how many times the world tried to drag her down. Determined, she started searching again in the school computers, at the library when she could sneak time. She found a scholarship program for young women in aviation, run by a small regional airline called SC. It was rare, competitive, and demanded a personal statement, test scores, and some kind of practical exposure. But there was a catch. Applicants had to be enrolled in or attending a flight ground school that led her to discover a free weekend, programmed 2 hours away, taught by retired pilots for underprivileged students. Without telling anyone, she lied to Roy, saying she was picking up Saturday and Sunday double shifts at the diner. Instead, she scraped together bus fare, packed sandwiches in paper towels, and took the long ride every weekend to learn how to read airspace charts, navigate by compass, and understand basic flight controls. For a while, the lie worked. She lived in fragment school, work, study, bus, return, repeat. Her body ached constantly, her eyes were heavy with fatigue, but her heart beat with something sharper than hope, purpose. She sent off the scholarship application in secret, sealing it with a prayer. Then, on a damp Sunday morning, the illusion shattered. Jenna was mid-lesson, huddled with 3 other students around a laminated cockpit diagram, when she saw the garage door of the hangar roll open. Roy stood there, arms crossed, his jaw clenched, eyes like stone, her breath caught. Before she could react, he stormed across the concrete floor and grabbed her arm. "You think you're clever," he spat. "Lying to me, running off to waste time with this garbage." Everyone froze. The instructor stepped forward, startled, but Roy didn't care. "We're leaving, now." He dragged her out in front of everyone. Her cheeks burned with humiliation as murmurs followed them. The bus ride back was silent. At home, he didn't even wait for her to step fully inside. "You want to fly so bad," he snarled, tossing her bag toward the door. "Fly your ass out of my house." The door slammed behind her, echoing like a final sentence. Jenna stood on the porch in the dark, her world reduced to a backpack, a cracked phone, and nowhere to go. But then Aunt Lisa slipped outside. Her hands shook as she pressed a folded wad of bills into Jenna's palm, small, worn, but more than Jenna had ever held. Lisa's eyes brimmed with tears. She wasn't brave enough to cry. "You were never meant to stay small," she whispered, voice cracking. "Don't let him keep you here." Jenna nodded, unable to speak, and turned toward the street, the night swallowing her silhouette. Behind her, the house she had endured for years stood hollow and quiet, but ahead, however, far was sky at 19. Jenna Coleman lived in the air and barely touched the ground. She rented the smallest room in a cramped apartment she shared with 2 other women, one a nursing student, the other an overworked server. Her nights were filled with study, her days with labor. Jenna scrubbed jetways and mopped terminal bathrooms. At the city airport, her cleaning badge dangling beside the same hands that now knew how to handle the yoke and throttle. Every dollar was counted, every meal stretched, every mistake paid for in time and doubt. She had already failed one of her simulation assessments, the instructor's voice heavy with disappointment as he advised her to consider other paths. She almost believed him, almost. But then, in the middle of that bleak week, a letter arrived from a familiar name, Ms. Graham. The envelope was wrinkled, the handwriting wobbly but unmistakable. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper and a sentence that made Jenna sit down on the edge of her bed, breath caught in her throat. Remember who you are when the clouds part. There were no instructions, no expectations, just a reminder that she was still becoming someone, even if she couldn't see it from the ground. And then came the email-in official offer from Skystar Airlines. She'd been selected for a rare, highly competitive internship for aspiring commercial pilots, one of only 20 across the country. Jenna read it twice, then a third time, her mouth trembling as she pressed her fist to her lips. This wasn't a dream. This was the runway. The future was finally within reach. Her first real assignment under the internship was more ceremonial than technical, a short charter flight for a local high school's career day program. Skystar partnered with schools annually, giving seniors a taste of aviation by flying them over the city in a regional jet. It wasn't until the final paperwork came in that Jenna noticed the name, Northridge High School. Her old school, the same auditorium where she had once stood, heart pounding, as a room full of classmates and teachers laughed at her ambition. On the day of the flight, Jenna arrived early, uniform crisp, hair pulled back tightly beneath her cap. The flight was supervised, but she was the acting pilot. Her instructor co-captain stood by quietly, letting her take the lead. She ran the pre-flight checks with the calm precision of someone who had bled for this seat. When the students finally began boarding, Jenna stayed in the cockpit, watching the names pass by on the manifest list. Then she heard it faint, familiar laughter drifting from the passenger cabin. She peeked through the cockpit door just long enough to see a familiar face stepping onto the plane. Ashley Monroe, now wearing a lanyard and a professional blazer, her long blonde hair tucked neatly behind her ears. An intern counselor, according to the roster. Jenna didn't blink. She slid back into her seat, pulled the headset over her ears, and waited. When the cabin doors closed and the plane began to taxi, the flight attendant signaled that she could make the announcement. Jenna took a deep breath, pressed the intercom button, and spoke with calm authority. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain speaking. I'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 212, a special charter in celebration of Northridge High School's graduating class." There was a brief cheer from the cabin. Jenna smiled faintly, then continued, "Before we take off, I'd like to dedicate this flight to anyone who was ever told they weren't enough, anyone who was laughed at for dreaming too big, or told they'd never leave the ground. Some of us were never meant to stay grounded." There was silence on the intercom for a moment. Then, a soft murmur rippled through the passengers. In the cabin, Ashley Monroe's head snapped toward the cockpit. Her face blanched. The voice steady, sure, impossible to mistake, belonged to someone she had once known and mocked without mercy. Jenna Coleman. Ashley rose halfway from her seat, peering toward the cockpit as if to confirm the impossible. But the cockpit door remained closed. Jenna didn't look back. Her hands were on the controls. Her eyes were on the sky. And as the plane accelerated down the runway, Jenna lifted them both, herself and every student on board, into the air, leaving behind the weight of every no she'd ever been given. The plane touched down with a smoothness that Jenna had only dreamed of in her early training days. No jolt, no stutter, just the soft kiss of rubber meeting runway. Applause erupted behind her as the students cheered, giddy with the thrill of flight. In the cockpit, Jenna allowed herself a single breath of satisfaction. This wasn't just a successful landing, it was a moment. The moment when she finally stepped into the aisle in her crisp Sky Star uniform, cap tucked neatly beneath her arm. The applause didn't stop. A few teachers clapped with a kind of stunned pride. And then she saw her Miss Graham, now retired, eyes watery, hands clasped to her chest. "You did it, Jenna," she said as they embraced. "You really flew." The next day, Jenna's story was everywhere. The local news ran a segment titled, "Mocked for Her Dreams. Now She Flies the Sky." They showed a side-by-side of her career day, humiliation, and her piloting the flight for those same students years later. Comments poured in, people praising her resilience, teachers from other schools sending her messages, young girls saying they wanted to be like her. For the first time, Jenna's name meant something more than a punchline, it meant proof. But there was one more place she had to go. The mechanic shop hadn't changed, still smelled of oil and rust. The same battered sign out front, the same tired clang of tools from the back. Jenna walked in, head high, her boots echoing on the concrete floor. Roy looked up from beneath a car hood, grease smudged across his forearms. He froze when he saw her in uniform, the pilot wings pinned to her chest. He didn't say a word. Neither did she. She walked to the cluttered desk in the corner, reached into her bag, and pulled out a small, framed photo. It was of her, standing on the tarmac beside a Sky Star jet, eyes to the sky, confidence radiating from her like sunlight. On the back of the frame, a handwritten note, "Thank you for making it harder. You made me stronger." She set it on the desk gently, then turned without another word. Outside, Aunt Lisa was waiting beside her parked car, eyes misty, arms already open. They hugged tightly longer than either of them expected. "I watch all your flights online," Lisa whispered against her shoulder. "Every time you take off, I feel like I can breathe again." Jenna smiled through tears, her heart lighter than it had ever been. No more running, no more proving. She had done it. And now she was free to fly, not just despite her past, but because of it. The cockpit hummed softly, the rhythm of switches and systems coming to life around her like an old, familiar heartbeat. Jenna sat tall in the captain's seat, her uniform sharp, her hands steady on the controls. Just beside the instrument panel, taped with worn edges, but still vibrant, was a small photo of her mother Elaine in her nurse's scrubs, smiling, holding a much younger Jenna on her hip. For a moment, Jenna reached out and pressed her fingers gently to the image, a quiet connection, a silent promise kept. Outside, the tarmac stretched wide beneath a sky painted in pale gold and endless blue. The radio crackled to life. "Sky Star 241 requesting clearance for takeoff," she said, voice calm, professional yet carrying a quiet weight earned through every scar, every step. A pause, then the voice from the tower responded, clear and certain. "Sky Star 241, you are clear. Fly safe, Captain Coleman." A small smile tugged at her lips. The engines roared to full power. Her eyes lifted beyond the windshield, past the horizon, toward a sky that no longer felt distant. Asterisk, they laughed when I said I'd fly. So I learned to soar where they'd never follow. Asterisk, the wheels lifted, the sky opened, and Jenna rose.